Hello and good day. It's Carson from MBCM. Welcome to another episode of the Multiply Podcast. I have my co-host with me as always. Say hello.
Hey, David here from MB Mission.
And Sarah also from MB Mission.
So Sarah and I had the opportunity the other day to record an interview with a group of pastors representing, I think, 9 churches. And so this was very different for us because technically it was a little intimidating. We're used to doing this with one person, and we have all the mics and the capacity to do it. But beyond that, it was just a very unique, cool way to share stories. But before we get to the interview, I just wanted to make a point in that I'm not a historian, but I do remember hearing some time ago that Winnipeg originally was just a group of boroughs, kind of like the New York of central Canada. So we had St. James, we had St. Vital, we had St. Boniface.
The holy boroughs.
That's right. And so we, the other day, were in North Kildonan, which I believe would be a borough of its own, I think, or at least a part of Elmwood. I don't know the area well, but that's what I've learned. And I tell you this because what we spoke about had everything to do with neighboring, neighborhoods, and community. So at its essence, our city, Winnipeg, is a gathering, a grouping of community and neighborhoods. Probably not unlike most cities, but it really struck a chord with me once we had this conversation. I realized that we all have our own little places and we can have an impact in them. So anyhow, I was hoping you guys might tell me a little bit about your own neighborhoods. David, where do you live?
Yeah, I'm in the West End right now. And it's interesting because I grew up in North Kildonan where basically everybody who lived around me looked like me. And now I feel often like a minority on my block, which is kind of exciting. There's kids playing all the time. There's people from all over the world who have settled in this neighborhood. And yeah, it's been good even to see like community gardens and other things that are bringing everybody to a central point. That said, I'm still trying to get to know my neighbors. It's not always natural for me to be the first one to shake hands or say hello, but doing my best. We brought over a plant to our neighbors the other day, so we're breaking those boundaries one plant at a time, What about you, Sarah?
David stole all my material. I also grew up in North Kildonan. I also live in the West End now. David and I grew up straight up across the street from each other, and now we live 6 blocks apart as adults. But yeah, I've noticed the same thing, like lots of community in the neighborhood that I grew up in, but more my parents' community, families that have been living there for 40 years, new families. You'd have to be pretty intentional to get to know them. Bigger yards, bigger properties. And now in the West End, everything is close together. I see and say hi to my neighbors more often than I used to, for sure, because they're out on the street all the time, kids playing outside all the time. And so there is, I'm really loving my new neighborhood. Lots of benefits, lots of dogs. There's like 10 dogs in the house next door. I'm not going to give the address because the pound might descend, and I want to keep everyone's identity protected. But yeah, lots of dogs in the West End.
Lots of cats in my area, living under the porch, saying hi when we're making dinner. They always creep up onto our windowsills.
Looking for a morsel.
That's right. Yeah. We're stingy, though. Otherwise, they're all going to bring their friends.
So we're going to go right down to our interview, and that starts with Anna Marie Geddert, who is a community life pastor at Jubilee Mennonite Church. Well, I'm here with a large group of people today. This is a very unique way for us to record our podcast. Sarah and I have made it to Jubilee Mennonite Church, and gathered around this table is a group of individuals from churches who are united together to perfect the art of neighboring. And this all started with Anna Marie Geddert, who's a community ministry pastor at Jubilee, correct? So Anna Marie, maybe you could tell us a little bit about the Art of Neighbouring and where did the concept come from originally?
Sure. The Art of Neighbouring is a movement that took form in Denver, the Denver area, when a group of 20 pastors got together and gathered with the local mayor and asked the question, how can we as churches best work together to serve our city? The mayor said, if we could just figure out a way to be great neighbors. So the pastors reflected on this, and they thought the mayor just invited a room full of pastors to get their people to actually obey Jesus. Love God with everything we have, and love your neighbor as yourself. So from this, they thought, well, this is what Jesus is calling us to do. And I was inspired to come back to our North Kildonan hub and talk with churches in the area about doing the Art of Neighbouring in North Kildonan. And I've observed over the years that we are not as neighborly as we could be. And the authors of the Art of Neighbouring, Dave Runyon and Jay Pathak, they have created a resource for churches so we could embark on a 3-week sermon series on neighboring. And the resource also gives you a block map where you can go out into your neighborhood and you can learn your neighbors' names, because 85 to 90% of Christians do not know their neighbors' names. And when I heard that, I was just like, okay, Jesus is telling us to do this and we are falling short. So how can we make this a reality in our city?
Amazing. So maybe you could tell me a little bit about why and how, as communities, and how we've lost touch with our neighborhoods, with our neighbors. What's different about community today versus decades past?
So in my own personal observation, I remember sitting like 30 years ago outside in my front yard on my front porch and watching tons of kids play outside and people walking and people actually interacting with their neighbors. So just about a couple years ago, I was saying to my husband, isn't it strange that you don't see as many kids or as many people outside on your street? So one of the reasons why, and I've attended some courses on this, that could be possible to the decline of neighboring, is that the automobile. So we can drive far to different places. Things aren't local anymore. You don't have your local grocery store. You don't have your church right on the corner, the barber shop, and all those other amenities. Another reason is air conditioning. Air conditioning makes us comfortable, but it makes us stay inside. Sometimes technology or the TV forces us, especially if you're an introvert, it might be really hard to get out there when you have all these other fun things to do inside. The front porch is another thing that we've lost. Or we have remote controls for our garage, that we open our garage door with our remote control, drive in, take our groceries into the house, and we don't have to see anybody else. I think also that we have more fear in our world today, and fear doesn't come from Jesus, and that fear is like you're worried about your kids because you don't want your kids to interact with strangers, and you don't want to open your door, and all of those things. Even the other day I got a call to do canvassing, and they said we're having such a hard time finding people to canvass for cancer door to door because everybody's too scared to do it. So those are some of the reasons.
Yeah, I think when you mention a little bit about your neighborhood when you were younger, it strikes a chord with me. I grew up, maybe almost 30 years ago in the Toronto area. Our house had a really big veranda, as did all the houses on that street. We'd spend hours on there, and the neighbors would pass by, and if you didn't know their names, you at least connected with them and casually as they would go by, and you saw the kids at the school, and the corner store was just down the street, and you were just a part of that community. And I can't remember experiencing that since. Just before we go in a new direction, I would just ask how people might be able to learn more about the Art of Neighbouring and the curriculum. Now, there's a website, correct?
Yes.
Artofneighbouring.com?
Yes, our www.artofneighbouring.com.
And there are other resources, and you showed me a report card, things like this. All the tools are accessible through
All
that?
of those tools are accessible. There's the sermon series. There's also a block party. If you wanted to have a block party, they show you ways to do that. And then they've also broken it down to different phases. So the first phase would have been the actual pastors in the congregations going out and getting to know their neighbors' names. And in a group that we meet with, and we call ourselves PINK, Pastors in North Kildonan, we had a challenge last June to go out into our neighborhoods and get to know our neighbors' names. And it was really good getting together after and talking about the stories. And there were some great stories about neighboring that was going really well, and then the hard things of neighboring, because there are hard parts of it too.
Yes.
Let's talk about locally how the Art of Neighbouring is happening in Winnipeg. We understand there's a group of 9 different churches in the North Kildonan area who are partnering in this. And can we hear about who those churches are, what that list is?
I'll step in as another voice in the conversation. It's Adam Robinson, one of the pastors on staff at Douglas Mennonite Church. I'm also one of those who meets in the circle of ministers that Anna Marie just referred to as PINK. So I was present for that experiment that we started out with. I think it was a good exercise that we tried it for ourselves as pastors with our families in our home settings before we thought of taking the challenge to our congregations. Beyond PINK, some of us sit in sort of more ecumenical circles of ministry, so there is a larger discussion that occasionally happens in the North Kildonan area. And one of the first things that we did was agree that we should reach out and sort of knock those barriers down and see who would want to be involved. And we had some very positive responses to that. And out of that came a group of 9 churches that agreed that our congregations could all free the same chunk of time up, 3 weeks at the same time, where we would go through the sort of the sermon themes, the challenges to our congregations at the same time, and start to take up those experiences and stories together. We also agreed that we would try and coordinate church signs and create a hashtag that could sort of link off of Facebook and so on, and be a little multimedia, a little playful with the fact that we were doing this. We were curious whether people would pick up on something larger happening that was connecting our congregations on the block. And so we went in with that sort of experimental, playful attitude with our congregations. The 9 congregations that participated then, some are denominationally clustered, but really it came from this invitation that went right out across all the denominational groupings. So Douglas Mennonite Church, Holy Redeemer Roman Catholic, Jubilee Mennonite, McIver Mennonite Brethren, North Kildonan Mennonite, North Kildonan United Church, the River East Mennonite Brethren, River East Mennonite, and the Springfield Heights Mennonite congregations. So if you could keep all of that in your head, you'd come up with 9. And it's just been a very exciting thing. And some of our congregations have worked together maybe in seasonal worship events or these kinds of things in the past, but this was really a new endeavor for us.
Adam, the hashtag you mentioned, what is it?
Hashtag NK Churches. And it was sort of a place where we were curious to be able to go and see who responded, who noticed, and to have a little bit of fun seeing what the power of social media is around these things. You can always sort of add a new layer these days with social media.
Yeah, that's really cool and really encouraging to hear that this kind of playful experiment has extended not just beyond your local church, but beyond beyond denomination as well, and maybe beyond friendships and connections that already existed. Was there door knocking of churches and people that you guys hadn't really connected with before, or was there already relationship to some degree with all those churches?
I'm not sure if any of the other pastors sitting in this discussion here right now want to jump in. If you do, indicate, but I'll keep talking. I think mostly we have relationships at various levels and sort of an email network among the churches. So a lot of the invitation went out that way and with a few phone calls. And maybe there's some stories here of how it extended.
Excuse me, my name is Marianne Isaac, and I'm pastor at River East Mennonite Brethren Church. And I haven't been meeting regularly with this group called Pastors in North Kildonan, but I am in another meeting with Anna Marie, and her excitement is contagious. And she asked if the monthly breakfast meeting of Mennonite Brethren pastors would also be interested in participating. And so I took that invitation to the Mennonite Brethren group. And so two of the congregations, ours and McIver's from that group, but also one beyond. So not in North Kildonan, but Fort Garry Mennonite Brethren also participated. And they didn't make the list, but they chose the same 3 weeks to do the same series and actually expanded it to a series that was a little longer.
Cool. So let's continue talking about this. I'd love to hear from some of you in this circle about some of your personal experience with pursuing the art of neighboring. It could be with your own church communities, you as an individual, and of course your neighbors.
I'm Bruce Miller. I'm a colleague of Anne Marie here at Jubilee for all of 3 weeks now. So the art of neighboring coincided with the very little need for us to get to know our neighbors and pulling up in a big orange truck and saying hello. So to have these considerations in this conversation going on in the community more broadly was a very useful thing for me and my family as we were thinking about this in a very practical way, and to have that push outward. And we encountered in a number of ways some honest surprise of having people very new to the neighborhood being that aggressive almost, that there's an expectation of reserve for most people that they'll maybe come by in 4 or 5 weeks, maybe. But to be able to be there and to take the advantages as they came and to have this inspiration right there was, I think, was welcome to us and welcome to our neighbors, that we could start those relationships in good ways.
My name is Erwin Kraker, and I'm from Springfield Heights Mennonite Church. My wife Carol and I live in this area, very close by. And when I saw that this little movement was starting, I'm quite new at Springfield Heights as an interim pastor, but I immediately warmed up to this idea because my wife and I have always thought we should get to know our neighbors.
Right.
And this wasn't a new idea that we should get to know them. And we've lived in this very pleasant bay for about 30 years, so we know most of our neighbors. But what it has done is it has alerted us to making a very conscious effort to not just get a shallow relationship going, but maybe build on it and get to be real friends. And a very simple experience how a relationship can start is I noticed not too long ago my neighbor was really struggling with starting his lawnmower. He just couldn't get it going. So I felt that it would be just a very simple matter to offer him my lawnmower, which I did, and he was gracious and accepted the offer and got his lawn mowed. But a simple act like that, it wasn't too much later that I needed some lumber to build one side of my property, get the fence going there. And so I have only a car, and I had a whole bunch of lumber in trunk of my car, and he noticed that, and he said, "Why didn't you ask me for my half ton? You can use it any time." And so one thing leads to another.
Yeah.
And just the other day, I was mowing my lawn, and I heard him calling my name. So I went over, and he had something in his hand. He said, "Last night we had a fish fry. And I'm just wondering if you like this particular recipe that I used on the salmon that we prepared. And so let me know, because here's a piece for you." But one thing always leads to another, and I noticed, too, that if you go out there in the front yard, people walk by, especially because it's not a highly traffic area in our bay. It's slow traffic and less of it. So people walk on the street. There are no sidewalks. They walk on the street. And I noticed that as I expanded my garden in front, people took more and more interest in that. And they'd stop and come and talk about, what's this that you planted, and so forth. So we've been excited with relationships to the point where we almost feel now we have kind of a crime watch thing going, where there's little petty theft going on once in a while, and then we share that and we watch out for each other, and it comes to the point of spiritual conversations, and where do you fellowship, and things like that. So we've found this to be a very exciting project.
Thank you.
Adam Robinson again. Irvin, your comment about building a fence or using lumber on the side of your property, I'm not sure what you were doing, just rang a bell for me. We had an amusing one week at our church. The week that we put on all of our church signs, "Good neighbors don't need fences." Good neighbors don't need fences. And one gentleman in the congregation came and wanted to chat with me a little bit about that, because he had seen this sign and thought this seemed a little perhaps simple, and that in fact we do need fences. So I was toying with that, wondering, is it that neighbors need fences but good neighbors don't any longer? I think there are still going to be boundaries up in our lives that are important, and that has to do with respect. But what would the world be like if we were out of our backyards into our front yards again, or bringing some of those fences down? And perhaps your fence needed to be there to keep the rabbits from, moving sideways.
Keep the dog in.
But that was sort of a question for the week that had a lot of us thinking again about why do we build fences, and why do we think of green space in front of our houses as a boundary that we'd like to have it big enough to keep the car noise at a distance, and we don't really use that space. So how can we go into these spaces that we've given up or put walls up in?
My name is Ewald Getz. I'm the pastor of River East Mennonite Church, and when this whole project or this whole program was introduced, I was very excited about that, because actually Katie and I have felt very strongly over the years that we are not just called to be in ministry and professional ministry, but especially also that we are called to be a light and to be loving neighbors wherever we are, wherever we live. And so we have practiced that, and I'd like to share one small story. We live in an apartment now, and often apartment life seems to be very closed off. Everyone is to themselves, and we made it a priority to get to know our neighbors, and we got to know one person very closely, and that began by getting to know her name. And Katie is a very good cook, and she began sharing food with this neighbor, and that sort of opened up the relationship and the heart of this neighbor. And later on, she shared with us, when we got to know her more personally, that sharing food with her meant loving her, because that is something that she had not received when she was growing up and a small child. And so we have been able to share with her. She has opened up and shared her life with us, And it's amazing to see how God's love has taken hold in her life as well. And she has become open to God, and she has began attending a local church here in North Kildonan. And it's just amazing to see the fruits of that. And even now, later on, we had that close relationship with her, and she also trusted us with a very difficult stretch in her life. So I think this example especially shows us that it is a very important and high calling to be a good and loving neighbor. So we would like to encourage everyone in that direction.
Thank you, Ewald. I think we have time to continue telling stories, and in doing so, you may want to consider expressing how this experience has maybe changed you, big changes, small changes, whatever that might be. Think about what that's done for you as an individual or family. But yeah, we have time for some more stories. Let's keep going.
My name is Don Rempel-Boschman, and I'm one of the pastors at Douglas Mennonite Church. And I think one of the marks of a good sermon is when a pastor can preach it first to himself or herself, that it's not just an academic subject. And usually when I preach, I like to preach on subjects that I feel fairly strong on. So those areas of the Christian life that I feel good about and that I feel like I have some maturity, I'm excited about preaching on, because I go, okay, I've worked this through. And this was not one of those sermon series, because I do about half of the sermons at Douglas. I knew I'd have to preach at least one of those sermons. And I went, oh man, in our old house I was a good neighbor because we lived on a little bay. There were a lot of little kids. We had little kids. The kids were all the same age, and children bring families together and they would play together on the bay. So I felt I was a good neighbor there. But about 4 or 5 years ago we moved to another street which has a little more traffic. Our children are growing up now, and so they're not playing with neighborhood children. And when I heard about this series, I thought about an incident that had happened a little while ago. Well, Anne-Marie told us about this series last fall, and so we said, okay, we're going to do it. And we did this exercise, as she said, last summer of writing down the names of our neighbors. And so I got quite a few names of neighbors I knew, and then there were some I was missing. So one neighbor who I knew really well, who'd been on that street for a long time, I went to her and I said, now what is the neighbor's name? And we pieced together, and then after I had written them all down, she got out her phone and took a picture of my notes, because she said, I want to remember the names of all of our neighbors. And so I put that, under the clear plastic on my desk so I'd see my neighbors and da-da-da. But there's a difference between knowing your neighbors' names and knowing your neighbors. And so some months later, I was visiting over at Bethania Personal Care Home, Senior Center, and I was coming out of the personal care home, and there was an older woman walking out. And I see myself as a fairly friendly person who talks to people who you run across. And so I started talking to her, and I started making little small talk with her. And she would have been about 70-ish. And then she looked at me and she said, it is really sad when people don't even know their neighbors. And I realized she was my next door neighbor. She had been my next door neighbor for 5 years, and I didn't even recognize her when she was out of her backyard. And so this sermon, I don't know, this sermon series, I hope it was good for our church, but it was also just good for me to say, okay, sometimes I need to preach on topics that I'm not strong on as an incentive and a kick in the pants to do a better job on something.
Thanks, Don.
Marianne Isaac from River East Mennonite Brethren Church again. I think for me, one of the things that I've seen doing the exercise of getting to know our own neighbors is not just having the one-on-one relationship with the neighbors, but seeing that grow so that there's connecting between a couple of households in a way that hadn't happened before. And we live in a little bit of a United Nations, and so the neighbor from the Netherlands, we were talking with them, and they had a friend who was going through a crisis, and that friend came from a Spanish-speaking background. And she had come to me saying, I know you're a pastor, you've got a whole bunch of people in your congregation. Anybody speaking Spanish who could help respond? There was a grandmother who didn't speak English involved. And we scratched our heads, and I said, well, can we pray about it? Oh, this is on the phone. And she, well, okay. And so we prayed and said goodbye. And a couple days later, she said, Marianne, as soon as you said amen and we hung up, I knew what to do. Because the other neighbor beside us is from Guatemala. I didn't even think they spoke English. And so we smile and wave, but we don't have a lot of conversation. And the neighbor from the Netherlands and I got together and we went to the neighbor from Guatemala, and she explained the situation. And the Guatemalan neighbors, yes, they do speak English. And they were happy to offer to phone the grandmother who was going through a crisis every day if needed. And it was really beautiful to see that several households who weren't really talking to each other come together to be a support for one another in a situation that needed a community.
So a new insight, new experience, new discovery. What does that mean in a way of change to Marianne Isaac? What's changed?
Well, I think my husband and I we're continuing a pattern that started last year of eating supper on our front porch. We have a front porch. And what's changed? When I complained to my husband about the 3 vehicles that are taking up our backyard completely so that we cannot do a barbecue in our backyard, this coming Sunday evening, my family is going to do a barbecue in our front yard, and this will be a first, and we'll see what happens.
I understand what type of sacrifice that is for you, because the vegetable oil you'll require for your barbecue will now no longer be able to go towards one of those 3 vehicles. But that's a story maybe for another time.
We're going to drive that veggie oil car to Toronto for our gathering this summer.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll see it there. Now, stories have changed.
Hi, my name is Denver Wilson. I'm a pastor at McIver Church, and I just really appreciated this opportunity, the Art of Neighbouring series, and how it came alongside some lessons that I feel like God has been teaching me and our church. Most simply, this series could be summed up with Jesus' command to love our neighbors, and it was really simple but also profound to just remember that that's literal. Those are the people that God has placed us among, and the people that are right around us. And so just reflecting on the truth that love plays out with people who have names and faces and stories. And sometimes in church ministry, we can develop target audiences or think about people who are more hypothetical and just beyond our grasp. But God has placed us among real people. And that's where we learn how to love. And that most simply is what I think God has been shaping in me. It's messy. It's people who are weird and people who are different from us. But that's what love is really all about. It's not about our preferences and drawing people around us that insulate us and that we agree on everything with, but it's discovering love beyond our differences. And we don't need to go anywhere to find that. It's right around us, all of our differences in our church or in our street. And so that's been a good theme for me to think about for myself. I also have the opportunity to preach fairly often, and so trying to weave that into our messages, that this is the context to learn how to love. But as well within my own family, it's inspired us to think about the geography we're in, the neighborhood that we're in, and the people who are present around us. And so we actually have a park right off the back of our house, and there are people over there all the time, and we've just sent out an open invite to as many people. They can pass that on, that each Sunday evening we're going to be gathering in the park. People are going to bring food and just see what comes. But to share a meal together and see who shows up each week, we're really looking forward to that. So the first one will be happening this Sunday at Elmwood Park. If any of you want to stop in, bring some food to share.
I'm Jack Dick. I pastor with Irwin at the Springfield Heights Mennonite Church, and one of the things about the series when we got started it is that if we're going to be faithful to the words of Jesus, the teaching of Jesus, we don't have an option but to love our neighbor, to love our neighbors. And so I thought, well, what does this mean for me? And we live not far away from here, and we have no children. None of our neighbors have children. But I said, I need to get to know my neighbors better. We have good relationships with our neighbors, but I'm a kind of a task-oriented person, and when I get home, I like to spend time with my own family. and my own children, who I don't get to see very often. And if I have any spare time, which is on a pretty casual basis, then I'll reach out to one of our neighbors. But I thought, I've got to be more intentional about this. And this takes time and effort. Especially for me, to do this to spend time in the front yard for people that walk by, and one of the persons, it's interesting. One of the persons walking by, they were walking their dog, and I was cutting my lawn, and he says, "Jack, man, you've got all these tall trees around your place. You should get them trimmed." Just in casual conversation. Yeah, and I said, yes, that's exactly what I was thinking. We should get them trimmed. And so what I thought, we could do this. I could do this together with our 3 of our neighbors. And so what I've done, I entered into conversation with one of our neighbors. And they said, yeah, we would love to get our trees trimmed. And I said, I too. So can we work at this? Yeah, let's work at this together. And so I talked to another neighbor there, behind us. And they said, yeah, we would also like to get our trees. So what we've done is 3 of our neighbors together, we decided on one corner. We got various quotes and so forth. And we decided together. And what we're going to do after our tree trimming, we're going to have a barbecue together. In order to get to know each other better. And we're working at it together. And I would have never otherwise have thought of it without this series, through this awareness. Now, we need to work together as neighbors and love our neighbors. And so this has been a wonderful, wonderful experience. And I'm very thankful to God for this, for this series, and also for this encouragement of really loving our neighbors and getting to know them better.
Yeah, just on this last question of how it's changed me, I would say the first thing it did was it gave me a great deal of affirmation, because I always thought the art of neighboring was important, and now to have a community of churches getting involved in this, it just affirmed that this is the right track to be on, and to get to know and love our neighbors. And so it gave me incentive to go deeper into that and continue with it. And furthermore, it helped me again to be thankful that we can find strength in community and working together. I felt very much encouraged, inspired to keep the faith and to remember others are keeping the faith with you, and we're doing things together. So I think it was a strengthening aspect to my entire ministry.
Thank you, Erwin.
This is Bryce Miller from Jubilee again. I started the storytelling by saying that we just moved here in the middle of the series. And where we moved from was a rural Saskatchewan village of 240 people. So neighboring had a very different aspect there. But I think both my wife and I were anticipating a little bit of, oh gee, we're not going to have the same neighbors, which in some cases was a good thing, because, oh gee, that garden's awfully weedy, and we're anticipating that as a loss of moving to the city. And to just be reminded that no, that's not it. We construct the community that we want to have.
Yeah.
And we have that liberty, and we have that mandate is important. But also, on the flip side is, and just thinking backwards, right? In communities where you do know everybody, or you think you know everyone, sometimes this could be even more important, because you have these long communities where people have lived in the same places for 40, 50 years, and nothing has ever changed, and nothing will ever change. Well, sometimes we need exactly this to remind ourselves that no, this is an active process.
Now, I know we've only really scratched the surface as far as everything we could say about this, and I'd like to, in the few minutes we have left, just change gears slightly. I wonder if maybe a couple of you, and then possibly Anna Marie, could speak to next steps. So now I recognize that we're smack dab in the middle of this, and we have, Sarah and I have hijacked your debrief and planning meeting, so it may not be reasonable to expect that you have solidified next steps, but I think to what Erwin had mentioned as far as having spiritual conversations, maybe we can say a few words about how we take this from becoming good friends and good neighbors to maybe spreading love and sharing your faith in a practical way.
Marianne Isaac from River East Mennonite Brethren Church again. I think there's a couple of different dynamics. What are the next steps? And I think to do a conversation together about next steps as a cohort of churches is one thing, but also next steps within the congregation. And partly it now is up to the individuals who have participated in our congregations. The Art of Neighbouring makes the point that a 3-week sermon is very short, but think of an arc of 6 months before doing the service, or the series, and 6 months after. And so there's a preparation phase and then a follow-up phase. And one of the things that we did during the preparation phase is really promote among our fellowship groups. This is a good resource. The Art of Neighbouring has a book with 6 sessions in it, with lots of practical exercises. And 3 of the fellowship groups from our church said, yeah, we'll take a look at that. Whether they do all 6 sessions or whether they do 2. It takes that ongoing conversation in a small group of people, like who are your neighbors and what are they doing? Another example is one of the gentlemen from our church came up to me and said, Marianne, this year my wife and I decided we're going to have a meet and greet for our neighbors in July. I said, oh, well, when do you usually have your meet and greet? And he just laughed. And he said, we've lived in our neighborhood 30 years, and we've never done that. That's because of this sermon series. And so there's a next step, and how do we, I guess my dream would be, how do we continue to give feedback among one another in the congregation to say, yes, we want to keep saying this is a good thing and telling these stories, even when we don't have the sermon series right now.
Ewald from River East Mennonite again. My hope would be that this would become something practical in the hearts of our people who attend our church, and not something only that is preached about a good topic that we've heard. We heard those comments, but my hope would be that it would really transform our way of thinking, how God has called us to be good neighbors in wherever we live. And I think one of the next steps would be also to talk about more, how can we not love our neighbors, but how can we also share our faith with our neighbors? And that is something that the series itself doesn't speak to that specifically, but I would find that helpful to move forward in that direction.
Anna Marie Geddert from Jubilee Mennonite Church. My hopes, not only for me personally and for us as a congregation, and my hopes extend to us as a city, is to find ways that we can go into our neighborhoods and engage schools and government and other churches and just all the local amenities, businesses, in what does it mean to look like as a good neighborhood? How do we take care of others? And I've started to have conversations with some government people, Winnipeg Regional Health, and it's interesting as you're talking with them that all of a sudden they share that, you know what, we're followers of Jesus, and this is an amazing thing, and they want to move it forward. They want to find ways to address the fact that if we are good neighbors, there are so many good things that can happen to our city. We at Jubilee, we're surrounded by 4 Manitoba housings, and we have a mix of First Nations, newcomers, a lot of single parent families. And the series was really exciting because we actually baptized 3 people who live in the neighborhood, who have not had any experience with what it is to know Jesus. And so we baptized them during the during the service. And it was so moving, and to hear their stories about feeling like they finally have a family. And they would say it was because Jubilee opened their doors. They loved us, and they loved us just the way we were, and they cared about us. And so in that process, transformation happened, and it was so moving. We got a hot tub into the church, and one of the women, who I can use her name because she said I could share her story, Faith, as Terry Gertson, one of the interim pastor, and I stood in the hot tub with her. She said, "Have you guys done this before?" and we said, "Not in a hot tub." But anyway, she wanted to be immersed, and when she came out, she said, "I have new life because you loved me, and you were an example of love that I've never had in my life." So I think by being an example to our neighbors of what it is to be in loving relationships, is to do that kind act for them, is a way that can open up conversations to tell them about Jesus and Jesus' stories.
I think you're absolutely right, Anna Marie, when you say this is an amazing thing. And it is absolutely an amazing thing, and I'm grateful to have this experience today. And what's incredible about it is it all begins with such simple, small things like a hello, how are you, and just being good friends and good neighbors. Thank you, everybody, for sharing your stories and your time. Can't say it enough. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, that was a great interview, and it was awesome to get to go and be a part of that conversation. That was a debrief meeting that Anna Marie and the group allowed us to crash and turn it into an interview, which was very cool. And I think what really impacted me from that conversation was hearing all these pastors telling these vulnerable stories of how they really took on this challenge of being good neighbors and starting very practically and starting with themselves first before bringing it to their congregations. And there was just a lot of humility in that conversation, and I was really blessed by it and encouraged and challenged. And it's been about a week since that conversation, and as I've gone home and passed my neighbors on the street, I've been thinking about this conversation every time I've done it, and had a couple more conversations, and gave some kids some watermelon the other day.
Nice.
And I've been thinking about it a lot more because of that interview. So it's been a good challenge for me and will continue to be. And I hope for you listening that it will also be a good challenge for you.
But have you fed any cats as a result of the conversation?
What's that?
Have you fed any cats, the street cats?
You know what?
That was part of my intro.
There really aren't cats on my street.
Oh.
Those are on those are on your street, David, all those cats. So, like I said at the beginning of this, it's funny because David and I grew up on the same street. We live in the same neighborhood now. And now there's another new thing that we have in common. David, do you care to share?
Oh, yes. Well, there's many ways to create community. And one of them is getting engaged, which I just did. I got engaged to Lena Brown, which is a sibling of Sarah's fiance, Taylor Brown. So now we're marrying siblings, which is super exciting.
Does it make you related in any way?
I have no idea the technical word for our relation. Are we? Yeah. Are we in-laws?
We're gonna be siblings-in-law.
Yeah. Siblings-in-law. Yeah. Right on.
Siblaws.
Siblaws.
Yeah, I don't know what that is.
Oh, that's great. So
that's exciting. So do you have a date set?
We're gonna see if we can pull off fall Although that's coming up quick, so we'll see.
No kidding.
Yeah, and we're thinking too actually about living in community right away too, and not only house shopping a little bit, but looking for, how can we invite our friends to live with us now too. So
Right on.
yeah, should be good.
Right on. Well, I think it's time to say goodbye. We'll have to gather again next month and talk to somebody cool, like maybe the Brown siblings. I don't know. It's just a suggestion. Anyhow, this was fun. We'll see you.